Hello, my name is Katie Bunting, and today I'm going to talk to you about my action research project that I've been working very hard on for the past few weeks. My topic revolves around discipline and what the most effective way is. Throughout my placements and classroom experience, I've seen most of the discipline techniques the exact same. The student gets pulled away from the class and goes into a timeout or detention style. But are these the most effective ways that will help the student succeed and avoid more misbehaving behavior? I'm going to begin by telling you about a few of my core values that helped shape my research. To begin, I believe that respect needs to be earned and can be demonstrated positively. If I respect my students, I need to gain my students' respect through being a positive role model. Sometimes this respect is tested in the classroom and students defy the rules and expectations of the class. I'm very open-minded and willing to try to create new punishments that will be positive in nature. Second, I believe that being positive is a necessary core value for all teachers. I have begun to understand that all students are going through something, whether it be having one bad day because they lost their soccer game the night before, or hating to go home because of their ongoing issue with their parents. When they walk into the classroom, I have the power and opportunity to make their days better. If I'm constantly giving detention, this is not creating a positive environment. Finally, I believe that all students should be treated equally, and there should be equity in the classroom at all times. This means that although some students may have different expectations or rewards, they are necessary to be equal to the rest of the students, and be specific to each child. Regarding classroom management, I think that some students require different types of punishments in order to succeed in the classroom with their peers, and I would really like to explore that. So our main problem here is how can we make discipline actually work in the classroom? So throughout my 3 placements I have been in, I've only observed traditional punishment techniques when a student misbehaves or disrespects another peer or their teacher. My associate teachers have all unanimously followed the negative discipline strategy that included think sheets and detention at recess. Although I think this is a good strategy to have a student reflect and attempt to fix the issue, I also think that for some specific students, a think sheet is part of their daily routine and no longer effective. Think sheets are usually just a quick write-it that the students would reflect on what they did and how it affected other people and what they will do to make sure it doesn't happen again. Keeping students inside at recess is effective for those who rarely misbehave. However, for those students who are constantly being told that they're doing something wrong, staying in for recess becomes a part of their routine as well, and the effectiveness of the discipline begins to fade away. As a student teacher, I've struggled with maintaining a classroom that is strict yet fair. I feel some students continue to display behavior that is not appropriate and they lack fear that anything negative will happen. Detention, in-school suspensions, and meetings with the principal have proved to not be effective in my classroom because it was such a common occurrence. So, that being said, my research revolves around this question. What is the effectiveness of restorative justice and peer mediation on discipline in the classroom setting? And this would shy away from the traditional techniques that are used, as I just discussed, the suspension or detention or think sheet. So in order to understand where all this is coming from, there's a few terms that you would need to know to make sure you have a full grasp on the topic. So there's 2 types of punishment. There's positive and negative punishment. So the positive punishment revolves around presenting a negative consequence when an individual misbehaves in order to prevent this misbehavior to occur again. This can include scolding or lecturing a child. Negative punishment revolves around removing a beloved stimulus or item when a misbehavior occurs in order to prevent this misbehavior from occurring in the future. So this can include losing a gym period or taking away recess, which is something I've used and I've seen all my associate teachers use. It seems to be somewhat effective for some students, but for others, nothing really changes. Here are some words that I'm sure you've heard about. Detention is the detaining of a student for a specific time determined by whoever is in charge. Suspension is usually the next step after the detention, so it's a removal of the student from their regular classroom for a specified amount of time, sometimes staying in the school and then sometimes outside of school. There's 4 different types of discipline. So there's permissive discipline, when expectations are lowered and there's little consequences for the students who actually misbehave. There's punitive discipline, where there's discipline that's too strict and offers no support to the child who misbehaves. Neglectful discipline, where their discipline embodies a lack of expectations and support. And then there's restorative justice or restorative discipline. It's the process of working with students to help solve the problem and rehabilitate the offender. So with restorative justice, it also revolves around peer mediation, which is a form of conflict resolution in which a trained student leader helps their peers work together to resolve everyday disputes. So I looked through 3 detailed reports about how restorative justice was used in the school setting and its effect on the students and school environment. The first article is Learning to Switch Gears in a New Haven, a Restorative Approach to School Discipline. So this article emphasizes a situation that occurred in a grade 8 classroom. This new student drew a sexually explicit picture of his teacher and shared it with his friends. Instead of a traditional punishment, surprisingly, the student, along with his peers and teacher, sat together and discussed the situation. The conversation allowed them to empathize with the teacher and take guilt and responsibility. There was no detention, suspension, or expulsion. This strategy is called restorative circles, where conflict attempts to be prevented and relationships repaired. Peer mediation within the restorative circle encourages students to help each other to solve arguments. The second article I looked at was From the Eradication of Tolerance to the Restoration of School Community, Exploring Restorative Practices as a Reform Framework for Ethical School Discipline. So this article talked about traditional discipline revolving around zero tolerance policies, which leads to suspension, which deems to be the most severe punishment. The form of punishment excludes offenders from the rest of the community, or permanently removes them. The traditional form of punishment tries to make schools safer by isolating the student, but in the long run, the school is less safe and the isolation can lead to more violence. The school discipline window theory suggests a different approach, restorative justice. Control and support are both necessary factors in order to allow students to meet their full potential. Being too strict and offering no support, which is the punitive discipline technique, is evident in a lot of classrooms, while the other end of the spectrum has teachers with no expectations and no support, whereas a neglectful discipline. I would put myself into the permissive category as a student teacher, as I let students get away with a lot of negative behavior. I would hope to try the restorative approach, where the teachers seek to work with the students in order to discipline and solve problems. Buckmaster explains restorative practices break through the cold, lifeless process of devolving out punishments in order to enter a world of human connection, de-emphasizing broken rules, and instead lifting up broken people, broken communities, and our collective moral commitment to do what is right. The conference in a controlled environment and involves all parties. This approach does not need to replace traditional zero tolerance policy, but rather work alongside it. The third article I reviewed was Restorative Discipline from Getting Even to Getting Well. So a principal recently confessed, "I know that punishments don't really change the student, but at least everyone involved knows that I did something. Discipline seems to be necessary in order to present an effective facade. The idea of traditional punishment is to force the student who caused the harm to experience the same harm by giving them this punishment, but this creates a cycle of harm with no solution. The consequences force the individual to protect themselves and not acknowledge the way their behavior affected the other person. Separation from the community due to discipline creates a divide in the child's mind and an unwillingness to learn. The restorative justice approach gives power to the victims who are usually forgotten when dealing with misbehavior. The goal is to heal or repair relationships through reflective and collaborative decision-making. I can understand how this process can reintegrate the students, both victims and offenders, back into the school community in a positive way. The only foreseeable issue I can imagine is if the other students do not cooperate with the strategy or take it seriously. This article provides a structure for these restorative chats: the unwind, rewind, and wind up. This allows the teacher to talk to the victim, the misbehavior, and observers and discuss how all were affected. I believe this is an excellent approach to deal with discipline and have a positive outcome. However, it does seem that time could be a limiting factor. So now I'm going to talk about how my research plan is going to go put this actual research into action. I'm going to look at 3 different types of data sources. I have surveys, interviews, and anecdotal notes. In the surveys, I'm hoping to learn the attitudes and beliefs of my students and staff regarding student discipline techniques in the classroom and in the entire school. In the interview portion, I'm hoping to talk to a few specific students in order to get a better understanding of their idea of discipline and if they have any ideas that would be a more positive approach to discipline techniques. And lastly, I'm going to be looking through anecdotal notes that I will create to see how students interact with one another and what happens when the class becomes more chaotic. I would like to see how the teacher manages negative behavior and how the students respond to this. Now we will look at the triangulation, validity, and reliability of the resources and data that I'm going to find. So I made a triangulation of data picture to show the 3 different types of data that I'm going to be collecting. As I said before, it would be surveys, interviews, and observations. Having this triangulation shows that I'm going to be using more than one type of data in order to ensure that this validity and reliability will be present. In the interview portion, multiple people will be interviewed with questions that are similar. There will be a direct conversation with each specific individual, and it's easy to review after the interview has commenced what I found. This will ensure that the resource I will find will be reliable and valid. Anecdotal notes are advantageous to my research, as I can record incidents that might be missed with a structured technique. I can write down everything that I see, which will make sure that there will be no bias if I am talking to one of the students myself. Surveys will be used, and each student will fill out the exact same questions to ensure that it is fair. And yes or no questions will ensure validity. The participants and settings that I will be using will involve one school in the Ontario school system. Grade 6 students will be the main focus, as that is where I've had most of my experience. I would like to talk to the grade 5 students as well through the surveys and questionnaire, and I would like to find what their experience is with discipline being the year before the grade 6 students. I would also like to talk to the grade 6 teacher and see what their types of discipline techniques are and how they are effective. So my research plan involves a timeline. Through my 3 types of data, my questionnaires, I will have one 40-minute period where the students will have open-ended and structured questions. Each student will complete the survey. The only unforeseen circumstance I've found would be that not all students will be in the class, and the survey will not be completed, having a majority or minority effect. For the interviews, they will occur for 3 to 5 students over a few recesses. I will create questions that are open-ended and allow my students to talk most of the time. An unforeseeable circumstance would be that the students will not elaborate answers, and the interviews will go through very quickly. My anecdotal notes will be taken through over a 6-week period, either daily or weekly. I will record a behavior log and explain the behavior incident and consequence from that incident. I will also record how the students interact with one another and what they respond to positively and negatively in terms of discipline as well as behavior. Unforeseeable circumstances are that no negative behavior will take place, which will result in no discipline techniques being observed. Some of the ethical considerations that I have to make sure I follow throughout my research process is that privacy is very important. So throughout this, confidentiality will be present. There will be no names and pseudonyms will be used. The only information that will be given is the grade that they're in. A letter will also be sent home to the parents for their consent, and students will also sign this consent form as well. Students do have the option to opt out of the research study if necessary. I want to focus on restorative justice and different discipline techniques in order to create a positive environment for my classroom. I would like to figure out a way to engage all learners and avoid removing students from the classroom in this constant disruption. Turning negative behavior into positive outcome through reconciliation and rehabilitation would be beneficial for not only the teacher, but also the rest of the students in creating more well-rounded citizens. I'd like to thank you for listening to my project, and I really hope you've learned something. I can't wait to continue this research and try to make the schools a better place.